We deploy and secure mobile email by pushing down profiles. You're going to push down a Exchange Active Sync profile when you deploy email management. Now, what this profile does, if you think back a couple of slides or in the last chapter, what this profile does is it tells the device how to receive email. And we actually configure the email profile for the user on that device. So you don't have to push down the email username and password for each user. We actually use lookup values. And you can see here in this slide, there's little brackets around the lookup value, email domain, email username, email password. And what we do is we dynamically pull that information from the user on that device. And that does one of two things. One, you don't have to manually configure these profiles for each user. And two, it keeps that information secure because you don't have to enter the password in the profile. It'll find it from the user's Active Directory information. Now, this profile is going to tell the user again to talk to the SEG, not directly to the email endpoint. We want to hide that endpoint behind the SEG so users can't manually configure that information on the device itself. When we deploy mobile email through the AirWatch console, we're going to give you some data loss prevention settings, or DLP. And these DLP settings are going to encompass maybe preventing moving of messages from corporate accounts to personal accounts. Maybe you can disable copy and paste. We could also utilize SMIME for greater security. We can require the VMware Boxer email client to be password protected. And we can even turn on some items such as you can't move messages out of that container, you can't print messages, and maybe you don't want to sync contacts or calendars on certain users' devices. So this is a great area to look through if you are configuring email for your production environment. Any place you see security settings or DLP settings, make sure you know those thoroughly because those questions are going to come up with senior management. They're going to come up with your IT departments as well when they ask, how are you going to secure this email once it's pushed down to the device? Now, on the device, we want to secure the device by using an email client with proper security. So the proxy direct integration is going to secure your endpoint, the Exchange server. On the device, we're going to use VMware Boxer, which supports iOS 8 and Android 7 and above. We're going to use the native email client, which is completely free. It comes on the device. The user probably already knows how to use it, but you can't password protect it, and it doesn't have the same security features as our products. You can use IBM Notes Traveler. That's a great one for Lotus infrastructure. It's free. It still has a secure password, but again, that's only for our Lotus infrastructure. NitroDesk Touchdown is great for older operating systems. It supports any version of iOS or Android with a third-party license. If you're going to use certificates to encrypt email, I think that's a great idea. Certificates allow you to revoke that certificate to take email off the device. If this device is lost or stolen, you don't have to remove the user from this device. You don't have to erase the device. If you're trying to protect your email, you can just revoke the certificate. And also, if the user's email password expires, you don't have to have them try to re-input that password. You can just renew the certificate and push that renewal down to their device. So it makes it easier for the end user, and it makes the device much more secure regarding email access. We have a feature called Email Notification Services, or ENS. What ENS is an iOS-only service, and here's the background on this. iOS devices have basically a background service that allow the applications to receive notifications even if they're in the background, not being used. But there's a queue. So if your email client is low on that queue of background notifications, then there could be a delay in notification for email. So you don't want some of those other applications on the device to take priority when it comes to getting your email real time. So what we can do is we can stand up a server either on your premise or we can have it hosted in a SaaS environment that uses Apple's own APNS, Apple Push Notification Service. And what we can do is we can actually force a notification down to the device as soon as you receive email. And it doesn't have to wait for that background refresh for that application utility on the device to say, hey, there's a notification for this app in the background. We'll give it to you real time over APNS. Great utility, great service for my iOS users. Highly recommended. This is something that's iOS only, again, not supported on Android devices. Let's take a look at the ENS on-premise Exchange server workflow. So you can see here that you have your iOS device, and the whole workflow here is you have the AirWatch server, and we can install an AirWatch email notification service on your premise. It talks to the Exchange server. This is going to communicate over port 443, so you only have to open up that one port. And we have a CNS, a cloud notification service that's hosted in the cloud by AirWatch. And we use certificates to securely pass that information from the ENS server, the email notification service, to our cloud notifications server. And then we pass that notification to APNS, or Apple Push Notification Service in the cloud, which then contacts the device and says, hey, there's a new email available. So one more time, this workflow goes through a couple of items. We need the ENS on-premise so you can talk to Exchange. We need CNS in the cloud so we can talk to APNS, because Apple is not going to allow you to talk directly from your Exchange server to their APNS server. And then we use certificates on each one of those cloud servers for that secure communication. And the end result is a notification on your iOS device. Now this ENS server has some requirements, very low. It's 2 CPU core Windows server, 4 gigs of RAM per 20,000 devices. Now this is going to be utilizing an SSL cert. If you're on premise, if we're hosting this for you in the cloud, we'll take care of that certificate. This uses Exchange 2010, 2013, or Office 365. And we want to make sure that you have a service account with the correct roles for your Exchange server. You need to be using AirWatch Console 8.3.7 or higher as well. The setup is going to be done in the console. You're going to make sure, one, that you have REST API support, because this ENS server on premise communicates with AirWatch through REST APIs. We need to make sure that we have a security feature turned on called SSL pinning. And then we also need to make sure that under email settings and email notification, we have that turned on. You'll then download this installer. You'll do this from the server that you're installing the ENS application on. You'll just access the console remotely. And it's a very simple Windows installer. It takes just a little while to set up. All right, so let's review these items that we've talked about in this chapter. If an organization includes iOS, Android all versions, and Windows Phone devices in their BYOD program, which email clients could they use for each platform? So if you remember a couple of slides back, we talked about the email clients. And we start off with VMware Boxer. We can use that for iOS and Android. Just make sure that you're using at least Android 7. And a current version of iOS, I would honestly stick with iOS 9. And this is not for any other platforms except for those two. Now, there is a slight licensing fee for it. It comes bundled in with your AirWatch deployment. If we go over to the native email client, this is only available for certain devices, and it's free of charge, but guess what? It doesn't have the password protection. So that would be a huge con for the native email client. The benefit of the native email client is that it is great for users if they're uncomfortable with using a third-party application, or you don't want to push down an extra application like Boxer. Now, we support it on all iOS devices. On some Android devices, we support the native email client, and we only support the native email client for Windows Phone devices. Now, if we're going to use AirWatch Inbox, we support that still as well. That's available for iOS and Android devices also. The Lotus Traveler is going to be available for the Lotus infrastructure, and then the NitroDesk email client is going to be our third-party option for older iOS and Android devices. What are the pros and cons of deploying iOS email via the native email client versus the VMware Boxer? I think I touched on that as well. The pros of using the native email client is it's completely free. End users probably already know how to use it. The cons are you can't password protect the native email client. VMware Boxer lets you use multiple email accounts. It's secure, it's containerized, meaning it uses our own software development kit. You can password protect it and authenticate users into that application. The only con I can think of is that you have to push down an additional app. All right, so what security settings should be used and to enable or to, what security settings should be enabled to prevent data loss into personal applications in mail? All right, I think you got the gist of that. Basically, remember those DLP settings, the data loss prevention settings that you can enable when you set up the email client. So there was a screen that showed that you could prevent moving messages. You could also prevent recent address syncing. You could prevent copy and pasting of messages outside the email client. You can prevent printing. So make sure you take a look at those DLP settings when you configure your email client in the AirWatch profiles.